Hello, today I will be discussing Task 1 of the edTPA. When creating edTPA lessons, the first thing a teacher needs to do is consider background information about their students. If a teacher understands what a child knows, then they will be able to formulate their lesson in the best way to help the children learn. The next thing that teachers do is they find that research and theory to back up what they're going to plan. If a teacher supports his or her lessons with theory, then they will know that their topics are being well taught and well received. Next, a teacher goes under the handbook, under the What Do I Do section, in order to plan their lessons. And the most important thing in this area is to know your environment. For that area, the teacher needs to know about their school. What percent of the students are African American? What percent of the students are ELLs? With that information, a teacher can really analyze their classroom and select an efficient learning segment, which is the next step, picking a learning segment to plan, teach, or analyze. In this area, a teacher picks 3 to 5 connecting lessons, focusing sometimes on one topic or a few related topics, to plan in a row. With those learning segments, essential focus is important, especially one that is aligned to content standards and objectives. This actually reminds me a lot of many of the standards that I picked and many of the learning objectives that I selected for previous lessons. Next, a teacher considers the literacy skills that are important for a student to complete their segment. For example, maybe I would like my students to learn how to write persuasive paragraphs. That would be a literacy skill because it is not just simply writing, it is a genre of writing, so that would make it a very strong literacy skill. Once I have my literacy skill solidified, I'm able to base content standards and objectives on that literacy skill. So with my example about composing text, writing a persuasive paragraph, I would search under Common Core State Standards to find one that related to that, and then I would base my objective on that. An example from the handbook is that sometimes science uses essential literacy strategies for comprehending or composing texts. Again, you need to have a literacy strategy or skill. You cannot just have the students read or write. Next, the teacher considers the language demands that are important for their lesson. What will the students be doing? Will they be reading? Will they be writing? Will they be speaking orally? This is where the teacher would note that and explain the function of the language. What will the students need the language to do? Here's the information about the specific lesson plans. The lesson plan itself must be only 4 pages, which means that the teacher may need to condense a little bit here and there in order to fit those pages. Another section will be commentary, but I will be discussing that a little later. For 5 pages, as the maximum, a teacher will consider their instructional materials. These are handouts, worksheets, anything that the teacher needs during the lesson, but this does not count assessments, which is the next section, written assessments and directions. But do not put student work in this area, that is for a later section. Citations are always important, especially if you're using someone else's work, as in a book or another, like an article. All right. Commentary. This is what I referred to earlier. For 9 pages or fewer, you will be writing about your actual lesson. And the areas that you will be discussing are the central focus, knowledge of students, and several other areas that are related, that are discussed in the handbook. With everything that you include, make sure you have that theory and that research to back it up. And with those, make sure you cite all of your sources. And those might be textbooks or articles, anything that you use that has that theory or research. Let's see. Supporting literacy development through language. That's again looking at your student knowledge. Also, discuss your additional language demands. What vocabulary, key phrases, syntax, and discourse that the students will need while working on your lesson. Then you'll be monitoring your student learning. How will the students comprehend? How will you know if the students comprehend or compose the texts in the correct way? This will be analyzing your assessments very deeply. After reading the handbook, we also watched several videos about the edTPA that I will be discussing briefly here. The first video was about the standard, central focus, and learning target. If you do not use all three of these, your lesson will not be as strong. So, a central focus is the concept or goal for the learning targets. And an example could be analyzing how individuals cause change in U.S. history. So the central focus unifies those learning targets and puts them into one concept that links all of them. In that regard, learning targets is what the students will know or do as a result of the lesson. These remind me a lot more of your objectives in your lesson that you might write on the board in order to show your students what you'll be covering. An example could be, I can read a paragraph of informational text and identify one main idea. The standard and central focus, they are all achieved in the future, which means by the end of the lesson, this is what the students will be able to do. Make sure when you're writing a learning target, you align it to your standard and central focus, because that really connects the lesson to all the different parts. Your learning target must also be simple enough that it can be achieved in the lesson. But I believe that you could also achieve it within a few lessons if you're having a thematic unit or a few lessons that relate to each other. Your target must also be specific and measurable, which means that you should be able to assess whether the students have really gained the understanding to perform in that area. All right, targets build on each other. That means one target might consider one topic and another will consider a similar topic, building on each other to one goal. All right, let's see. How to show connections between learning targets. One way you can do that is by using the same standard, and students should interact with the learning target. They should do some activity that helps them fulfill that goal. For example, a student could follow the learning target activity, which has them do one action at the beginning, another in the middle, and a third at the end. Okay, lesson writing. We discussed this earlier, so I will not go into it. Just make sure you follow all of the requirements for a lesson and connect all the different parts. All right. Lesson content and sequence. As I said earlier, you could have 3 to 5 lessons within your learning segment, but the person who made this video stated that 5 lessons would be good in your portfolio. For each, try to pre-assess your students. With that information, you are able to formulate additional lessons or maybe adapt as you are teaching in order to support your students a little better. With those assessments, there are multiple informal and there should be at least one formal assessment. Also, a teacher should try to allow their students to use their student voice. With that, students can reflect upon their knowledge and complete that. Here is one chart that shows different areas where assessments are possible. All right, for each assessment included in the lesson plan, the teacher should have a rubric, checklist, or some other way of analyzing the student's work. This helps a teacher because they're able to discuss with their students what is expected before handing out the assessment. For example, in one of my phonics lessons, I had a rubric in order to assess my students' work. All right, let's see what else we have here. Here, the second video is about the assessments on their own. As I stated earlier, informal and formal assessments are covered by each lesson. Integrating assessments. Let's see. Here is an example of an informal assessment that was included in the second video that we watched. I will call on a student to come up to the front of the class and fill out a chart. Within this, it is informal because the teacher is not writing down any information about the student. They are simply thinking in their mind, what do the students know? This could actually be used as a pre-assessment within a lesson. All right. Here's an example of a formal assessment. This looks pretty typical as it is a quiz or a test. It has multiple choice, reading a passage and answering questions. This is typically what would be your summative assessment. You might even have that at the end of your learning segment, so it wouldn't be the first day of your 3-day lesson plan. Okay. Let's see. As I stated earlier, we need pre and post assessments. For each assessment, you must have directions, quantitative questions, which either have a correct or incorrect answer that the student can give, qualitative questions that I think of as essay response, student voice, which are them reflecting upon their performance, and then the whole assessment must be aligned to the lesson plan. Let's see. Here's an example of a pre-assessment. It is a little fuzzy, so I will skip discussing this one. How to align assessment with learning targets. One way that a teacher can align their learning targets is by including similar words between the learning target and between learning targets, or the same learning target between multiple lessons. As you can see here, they use the word artifact in both of the two lessons. Okay. Assessment criteria. Make sure you align with your quantitative, qualitative, and student voice sections. This really makes sure you're assessing exactly what you taught. Pre-post assessment analysis. When you are teaching your lesson, you can look at your student data in multiple ways, but one way is to compare their pre and post test performance. If the students don't do extremely well on the pre-test, but they did extremely well on the post-test, you can infer that they learned a lot. Let's see. Commentary. Within the commentary portion of the ETPA, the candidate